Well, we are at part 4 now of our Reconfirm, and today the story that's, by reconfirming, we're kind of going back to the beginning of the Bible, and we are kind of re-looking at some of these stories and finding what it is exactly that we do believe and why we believe it. Today, it's Moses. He's so popular, he takes 4 books of the Bible: Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses is a long story, so we're going to be kind of brief. We're going to kind of talk about just some specific things. But Moses is the person that brought the law to the land. Not only the law of worship, but the law of even hygiene, even the law of just social rights and things like that. This is, some of those laws are the ones that the Pharisees had a big problem with because they saw that Jesus was kind of tweaking them just a little bit. And so this is the image that a lot of us have of Moses, right? Charlton Heston in a really bad wig. And it's actually, I want to tell you, Moses in real life, he wasn't this, I'll do what the Lord tells me to do, He was more like this. That is the image that I want you to have when you think of Moses. That's Moses. This is Moses. I really don't want the job. This is what Moses is. And we're going to get into that a little bit. The whole period of Moses, we're about, I want to say, almost 1,400 years before the birth of Christ. Okay? And it's speculated just a little bit there. There's people that also speculate of who was in charge of Egypt. Now remember last week we talked about Joseph bringing everybody into Egypt. They were given some land. The Hebrews, over many years, they grow in population. Certain pharaohs passed on, pharaohs that had no idea who Joseph was, who Jacob was, and just saw the Hebrews as annoying, as kind of scum of the earth. And so they started to put a heavy hand on them and tried to control them by making them slaves. They put slave masters over them, and they were used to build things, and they were abused, they were beaten. And at one time, the Pharaoh, which there's 2 arguments, and it depends on kind of what you watch, because some of the dramatic things will actually say that the Pharaoh was Ramses. But history kind of shows that it was Thutmose the third, and that he might have been the Pharaoh at this time, because it blends in a little bit better to that 1,400-year thing. We use some math there's a reference of King Solomon's reign, and so we kind of go backwards there, and that's how we kind of decide where in history this all happened. And so at one time, the Pharaoh, if it was Thutmose, he was getting so bugged by the population growth that he said, any male born to the midwives, I want you to kill him. If a woman has a male, I want you to kill him right away. Now, the midwives didn't do this because they feared, it was just a despicable thing to do. So he had his soldiers do it. And so they were going around killing male babies. Moses' mom put him in a basket that was lined with tar, and so it would float, and put him amongst the reeds. It was found later by the Pharaoh's actual daughter, who actually is the person that named him Moses. Because Moses sounds like the Hebrew term for brought out of, meaning brought out of the water. That's why she says, I'm going to name him Moses because from the water in which he came. So that's where he got the term Moses. Unfortunately, he was still Hebrew. And again, there are different dramatic movies and things like that where you see that he thinks that he's Egyptian. Well, the way the Bible indicates is that he pretty much knew that he was Hebrew the whole time. He looked different, he was treated different. Imagine being in the kingdom of the Pharaoh that had a great prejudiceness against your kind, against the very person that you were, against that very bloodline. And basically, the only reason that he was even tolerating him is because the Pharaoh's daughter asked to keep him. So we're guessing that Moses probably grew up in luxury, but not very popular. And the Pharaoh's son, Thutmose III, would eventually take the reins. Now, Moses was an emotional person, and he knew what was right and what was wrong. He knew in his heart of hearts that his own kind, the Hebrews, were being greatly abused. And after years of this, it got to him. The Bible mentions that he came out and he started to watch the Hebrews work. And he saw a slave driver, a soldier, seriously beating a Hebrew, which was just part of the gig at the time. This angered him, and this is where we see that Moses was a man of great feeling. So much so that he kills the soldier. He kills him with his bare hands. He's so filled with rage that he ends his life. Now he knows that he has to leave. He knows that the word is getting out that he has murdered an Egyptian, which, as a Hebrew, even as the Pharaoh's daughter's adopted son, he's still a wanted man. This might be the very thing that the Pharaoh could use to say, I'm going to kill this guy now. He's finally out of my life. So he runs. And this was when he did this, he was about 40 years old. He runs and he hides. He hides for another 40 years in the desert around Moab. And a lot of people think that he was out there by himself. The movies always show him like in a tent, just talking to birds and things like that. He didn't talk to birds. When he was out there, he met a priest and married one of his daughters. He had 2 kids. When he came back to Egypt, he brought his family with him. This was not a loner. This was a guy. I want you to really think about that. Moses was a guy. Not this big, tough hero, but a guy like this. So much so that when God called upon him to free his people, we all know that story. Moses did not want the job. There was no, well, if God says I can, doggone it, I'm going to go out there. There was no John Wayne-ness to him. There was Barney Fife-ness. I want you to watch a little bit of a video clip where Ben Kingsley actually plays Moses in this particular drama. It's one of the first dramas that I ever saw that I think Moses probably has a good description of who the man really was. And just watch how many times he tries to use an excuse to get out of God's call. Let's watch.
Let's go see. You burn. The flames don't consume you.
Moses. Moses.
Here I am.
Remove your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground.
Why do you come to me?
I have heard the cry of my people Israel. I will send you to the Pharaoh, and you shall free my people from Egypt.
Why me? A man clumsy with words. Who am I to go before the Pharaoh?
I will be with you.
If I go to the Israelites and say that God has sent me, they won't believe me. They'll ask, what is his name?
I am who I am.
They won't listen. Why should they? They'll seek signs.
That rod, cast it to the ground. Grasp it by the tail. Now, put your hat under your cloak. Now withdraw it. Now, replace your hand, and then withdraw it. This will be the sign that you speak with the voice of the Lord their God.
Please. Oh, no. Not me, not me, not me. I've never been a man of words, not in times past, not now. Even as you speak to me, I'm still of speech.
Your brother Aaron will meet you, and you will be my voice to him, and he will speak for you to the people.
A lot of people don't realize that because Charles Heston never did it, but Moses had a stuttering problem too. It says that he was slow of speech. He was a very unlikely hero. And yet, he paved the way for not only the Israelites to get out, but he paved the way for the rules of worship and of things that we do even today. In many ways, the Ten Commandments, the different rules in Deuteronomy, and the laws of Moses has affected the world. And this was a guy that did not want the job. And why did he not want the job? Not me, not me, not me. How many of you would, if you were called by God, would say that? You know? I mean, you might say, holy, but it might be followed by something else that's not really holy. It might be followed by, a word of just get me out of here. Those are the type of people that God calls. It was a struggle, too. Because as we know, Moses would fight with the Pharaoh. And very few times did Moses actually do the speaking. Like he said, he would talk to God put him gave him a little bit of comfort because he had a brother Aaron. And he would say stuff to Aaron, and Aaron was the one that actually talked to the Pharaoh. Aaron is the one that actually threw the staff down. Because Moses was pretty darn scared. And so he gave us a buddy system to help us. The lack of faith that he had carried on for a long time as they left the desert. By the time that this happens, Moses is 80 years old. He's not as young as Ben Kingsley is there. He's probably as old as Ben Kingsley is now. This was an old guy that stuttered, that was a murderer, that thought that he could just live out his life with his wife and children and not be bugged by this. And now he's being called to do something that's going to affect the world. For 40 years, he took the Israelites out of Canaan, or out of Egypt to the land of Canaan. The black line here is their route. These routes here, those were trade routes. And as you can see, they are a lot quicker. But God didn't want them to go that way because he said, if they go that way, they're liable to be attacked by thieves and things like that, and it'll break their spirits and they'll just run back to Egypt. But it didn't matter what route they took because they kept wanting to go back to Egypt. They complained all the time. This was the worst case scenario of are we there yet? They complained that they weren't getting enough food or water. God provided them water. He provided them a thing called manna, which was basically like a bread that tasted like a honey wafer that actually dropped out of the sky. And he said, just take what you need during the day. I'll give you more tomorrow. Even then, when you got God dropping bread from the sky, they didn't have enough faith to do that, and they kept trying to take more than they could, and the next day, then the abundance that they took left over was filled with maggots and all sorts of stuff. This is a whole time of God saying, look, just trust me. Just have enough faith to do what I say. Moses couldn't do that, and neither could the people that he was with. It's very hard for us to trust when God says trust. It's very hard for us to have faith when God says, just have faith in me. You know, we look at this story and we think, oh, those Egyptians and the Israelites, the Egyptians were just bullies, and the Israelites, they were just idiots because God was right there with them. Well, he was. But the minute that his back was turned, they would lose their faith. As a matter of fact, right around here, Sinai, this is where Moses found the Ten Commandments. And it took twice. The first 10 commandments were smashed to the ground. Why? Because it took Moses about 30 days to go up this mountain and speak with God. This is where he would speak with God, and God would write the 10 commandments with his own hand. But by the time that he got down, the Israelites had built this golden calf and were worshiping it. And we think, idiots. You're with God. You got bread falling from the ground. There's water actually coming out of rocks for you to drink. And he's gone 30 days, and you can't handle it. But how many times does that happen to us in our faith? How many times do we, once we leave church, go and worship a golden calf? Whether it be something in our life. How many times do we worry about stuff that we shouldn't be worried about? How many times do we think that we can't do something and scream, not me, not me, not me, when God is saying, shut up and do what I say. Just listen to me. When they asked God who he was, this is when God said, I am what I am. That's why God's called the great I am, because he said, I am what I am, meaning it starts and it ends here. This is the genuine deal. I am God. But today, very much like the Israelites, we use him as kind of a part-time God. We decide every Sunday morning whether church is really important to us or whether our faith is really important to us. We decide whether we take God with us on our daily walks through Monday through Friday and Saturday. We wonder during the Christmas season if God's really with us as we're buying the gifts, as we're punching people in the face for a Tickle Me Elmo doll. I guess they don't have Tickle Me Elmo dolls anymore, do they? That was a big thing when I was in radio, and never mind. It was so much of a trouble that God even took them over here. Around here, the reason that this is all messed up is because we don't really know where they parted the Red Sea. We don't have the evidence for that, but we know it was around there somewhere. But around here, he takes them to Canaan, and he said, go ahead and take it from the Canaanites, Jebusites, Amorites. And they snuck over, and they looked, and they said, no frickin' way. These guys are bigger than us. They're more powerful. We're not doing it. And they fought Moses on this. Moses was saying, but God said he's going to be with us. You know, the guy with the bread and everything, you know? And they said no. And they even talked about stoning Moses to death. They turned on Moses. So God said, all right, it's time for everybody to take another lap. And he made them walk around. He said, you don't believe me? You don't believe I am? Well, you guys get to go back to the desert. And nobody from this generation, nobody from the generation that walked out of Egypt is going to see the promised land. The only people that went into the promised land was the second generation. It took them 40 years in the desert to make what might have been actually about a 2-year trip, because they kept wandering and complaining and moaning and turning away from God every chance they could. And God kept saying, you don't get it. See, God is not this wishy-washy guy of this genie in a box just saying, oh, how can I help you? He is a person of grace, but he's also a person that says, you know what? I need you to do your part as well. And that means trust me. You worry about this, and you complain about that guy, or you know, this stops you, or you decide whether or not you want to worship, or you decide whether or not somebody told me that there's nothing more grumbly than people that leave church and gripe and moan because of the traffic. We immediately, once we come out the door, we lose a little bit of our Christianity. We lose a little bit of our faith. We lose a little bit about who we are. That's where God is saying, don't you realize I am who I am? I am it. This is not some recreational thing. This is not something that is a short-term deal. This is not something that you can take for granted. This is not something that you can have and see the world as a miracle itself that God created, and then the next minute forget about him. This is God saying, you want what I have, then believe in me. Have that faith in me. But the one thing we've got to realize is that he calls on people. And one thing that God knows, just like a parent, sometimes you got to take that lap. And never once during that 40 years did God give up on him. He told him once, as a parent, he said, I'm just going to, I'm really considering just walking away from this. You guys are just kind of making me tired. You're becoming obnoxious. You're just complaining and moaning. I'm just going to walk away. And that's when they said, please don't. He said, well, I'm not going to. If you're a parent, you've said that before. I've had about enough of this. Everybody out of the pool. This is where our faith comes in. This is where the first real challenge of our faith comes in. And the example that God gives us to take with us is a bunch of people that struggle with it all the way to the end. All the way to the end. So if you have doubt, if you trip every once in a while, if you find a golden calf that takes your attention away from God, God is still there. And he's still saying, I am who I am. If you come back to me, I will come back to you. And I am who I am. Many, many, many people died on that trip. At one time, Moses was even ordered, they divided. Who believes in what God is telling us and who doesn't believe? And the people that believed were told to take their knives and to kill everyone that didn't. There's some things in the Bible that are just kind of violent, kind of mean, things where you think, why would God do that? The only answer that we truly have is, I am who I am. And sometimes that means God is saying, I am a God of grace, but he also says I'm a God of jealousy. I'm a God that gets angry when you turn your faith against me, or you worship something else other than me, or you think that you're the God. I have problems with that. Because I am who I am. That's what God is telling us. And that's what he told the Israelites as they're on the way to the promised land, which Moses will never once step foot in. Because, see, Moses even got a little bit cocky toward the end. They were complaining that they didn't have enough water and there was a stone here. And before, Moses was told just to tap the stone with his cane and water would actually come out of it. He got upset and he prayed on God to do it. And he tapped it. And that should have been his faith right there. Just wait and the water will come. God said it will come. Wait for it. But he got mad. And he tapped it more and beat it. And he got mad and his faith left him. And God said, I have to be consistent here. The generation before you didn't get in, and you will not either. And he died without ever seeing the promised land. Because his faith blocked the door. Because his faith stopped him from getting further. Just like the people that didn't make it into the promised land, their faith is what stopped them. That's what happens to us on a daily basis. We leave here, and our faith is challenged as soon as we get out the door, or join a meeting, or worry about something. That's when our faith challenges us. Remember Moses as Barney Fife. He was insecure. He was slow of speech. He didn't want the job. And he challenged him because he saw him as a person. God saw him as a mission. What do you do when God calls you? What do you do with your faith? Where do you take it? And how far out this door do you bring it? This is not a recreational thing. This is God saying, I am who I am. Will you pray with me? God, we're challenged every day. Every moment of our lives, we act like, well, we lose our faith. We either lose it by our feelings of anger, our insecurities, our feelings like it can't possibly be God calling us. We worry about all of these things. I wonder sometimes where the world would be if we all just trusted you, how far we would have advanced. I pray that you just give us enough of that faith. Give us enough of the faith that you gave the people that did see the promised land. Let us cross our own lines, our own walls, our own things that are blocking us. Let us have enough faith to cross over on those and move forward into our promised land and hear your call and your grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.